Hi, and welcome back to the beginners section. This is lesson 2, and we're going to cover a few different things today. The main thing that we're going to look at is chords. I'm going to get onto those in a second. But before we do chords, we're going to look a little bit at technique, how not to injure yourself when you're playing, and a few things you should bear in mind before we start the chord lesson proper. So the first thing is wrists. You don't want your wrists when you're playing to be bent. You want them to be as straight as you can manage. So with the left hand, to get the fingers around the guitar, which is the first thing you have to learn before you play anything, be it chords or otherwise, is you put your hand flat, like you're holding a plate, and then you bend your knuckles at the first knuckle. This makes your fingers look very big on camera, as I've just noticed, but I'm just bending them at the first knuckle, and then you'd bend the rest of your fingers so that your fingers point round all the way. Now that gets your fingers pointing back at the strings. I'm going to go through that again. So drop your arm nice and relaxed from the shoulder, you pick your arm up from the elbow, you bend your fingers at the first knuckle, you bend your fingers again, and that gets your fingers around pointing straight back at the strings. Now, there's a big word that I like using called perpendicular, and that kind of means at right angles to. So your fingers want to be pointing straight into the fingerboard, like you knocked a nail into the fingerboard, okay? Or perpendicular with the fingerboard. Good word. So that last knuckle wants to point straight down, and that's going to give you a nice kind of fretting angle. I don't know if you can see that clearly. My fingers are pointing straight down, and that's what we're after. So, first thing, don't bend the wrists. Second thing, keep your fingers bent over. Very important. Those are two important techniques. This is an E minor chord that you can see here. And this is the box that you studied in the first lesson, but with some added features. It's got some dots added, and the dots tell us where we play and place our fingers. So imagine that you had ink on your fingers. The dots are what would be left after you'd played a chord, okay? Now a chord is just basically more than one note, more than two notes, sorry, is what a chord is. So we're playing a chord when we place our fingers where the box says. That's what we're doing. And in order to play that chord, we're going to put our fingers exactly where the dots are. But what fingers? Well, if you look on the string that the dot's placed on, at the top of the string, there's a number, and that number tells us which finger we're going to use. So on the A string, you can see there's a dot on the second string, on the second fret. And it's our second finger. You can see that at the top. It's got a number 2, which means second finger on the second fret on the A string. So that's where we would put this finger. Second finger, second fret on the A string. Now, if we look to the next string, the D string, we can see the third finger is on the second fret of that string. And we know it's the third finger because there's number 3 at the top of the line, and that says third finger on the second fret. Now, I'm going to turn the guitar around this way now. All of the other strings on there are open. It's got O, 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 and that means that they are open. And open means we play them with no fingers on. There's nothing touching the E string, and that's the one I'm playing there. So that gives us an E minor chord. The E string's open, that's what the O means. On the A string, we're on the second fret with the second finger. On the D string, we're on the second fret with the third finger. On the G string, that's open. The B string's open, the E string's open. And that gives us an E minor chord. So if that makes sense to you, if you can see how we've taken that sideways image of the guitar and it's now a chord box, if you can see how that relates, like from the first lesson, then you're ready to move on to the rest of the chords. If that still isn't making sense, just go back and watch that section of the video again. Either go back to the previous lesson or just go back over that chord until you're happy with that as an idea. So, now it's time for the next chords. I'm going to go through these a little bit faster. If you get confused, pause the video, go back and have a look. And don't forget, you've got the printout sheet, so you've got the chords on the sheet that you can look at and you can correlate at the same time as I'm playing through these chords. So we've just done an E minor. If we look at the next chord, which is E, we can see that it's exactly the same except for the first finger on the first fret of the third string. So we count along the strings 1, 2, 3, there it is. There's the first finger. Everything else is the same, still strummed from the E string. That's an E chord. Now, that's actually an E major chord, but we don't call major chords major because they're the default chord. So if no one says otherwise, it's going to be a major. If someone says play me a D chord, they mean a D major. If they say play me an E chord, they mean E major. That's how we know that they're major, because they don't say. If they say minor, then they're telling us something different. So you've got to listen specifically to what chords you're told to play. That's an E chord. The next chord we're going to look at is an A minor, and if I leave my fingers where they are, you can see that A minor is exactly the same as E. It's just all of those fingers are now on the next string along. So where our finger was on the A string, it's on the D. Where it was on the D, it's on the G. And where it was on the G, it's on the B. And you can do that as one motion and just move the fingers down to the next string. Strum from the A string. We don't strum the E string because there's an X over the E string, and that means don't play it. And we're going to strum that from the A string, and that's called A minor. The next chord that we have is an A, and as you can see, the second and third finger from the A minor are just going to drop to the next two strings, the G and the B string, while the first finger steps up to the second fret of the D string, and that's going to give us an A. Still strumming from the A string, there's still an X over the E, so that means we strum from the A, and there's our A. Now at this point I just want to mention that we've had E minor and E from the E string, and we've had A minor and A from the A string. So the root note of the chord, the first note that you strike in the chord, is the same name as the chord. E minor from the E string, A minor from the A string, E from the E string, A from the A string. See that correlation, how that's working? So the first note that we're striking is the root note of the chord. That just means the first beginning home note of the chord when you say root. Okay? That's going to make more sense in following lessons. But for now, it's like a capital letter. The capital letter is the beginning letter of a word. Well, think of the capital and the root as being the same thing. So the capital of E is E. That's the way it works. Okay. So we finished on an A chord. Next we have a D minor. First finger moves down to the first fret of the first string, while the third finger slides up one fret to the third fret on the B string. We're strumming this from a D. You can see there's an X over the E and the A string, and we give that a strum, and that's a D minor. The next chord we're going to look at is a D. Second finger drops down to the second fret of the first string, and the first finger steps up to the second fret of the third string, and that's a D. And when we play the D, we get this from the D string. Okay, that concludes our first 6 open chords. Now the next 2 chords we're going to do are called C and G, and these do strum from the E and the A strings, but we have fingers on those strings. And it's important that you see the difference between these 2 chords. These open chords, these strummed from an open E string or an open A string or an open D string. These next chords are going to strum from a string with a finger on, and it's important that you understand the difference. So A minor is where we're going to start from in order to get to a C. We like to start with a chord that's close to the one that we're doing. So if we put our fingers on an A minor and then go into a C, we move the third finger to the third fret of the A string. And if that's a little bit of a stretch, just relax your thumb, drop your hand down so you've got enough space. And then finally, we have a G chord. And a G, we take our first finger off and move the second and third finger to the E and the A string, and the little finger curls up onto the third fret of the first string, and that gives us a G. And those are our first 8 chords. You've got the PDF sheet with them on. Have a look at where your fingers go exactly. You've got the video that shows you how to play them. I'm going to go through them all one time very slowly. E minor. Next is E. Next is A minor. Then A. D minor, D, C, and finally G. That concludes our 8 chords. As far as technique goes with these chords, as I said at the beginning of the video, try and keep your fingers bent over. And if you want to think about leaving a little bit of space underneath the guitar, imagine there's a pen there. Imagine there's enough room for a pen, and then your fingers can bridge around the chord. Okay? So in the first lesson, we looked at a chord box and how the guitar related to the chord box. In this second lesson, we've covered the first 8 chords. Do try and learn those if you can. Take your time, use the sheet provided, go through this video, keep returning to the bits that you need to in order to learn those chords. And again, there's 3 steps to learning. We learn, we practice, and we apply. So learning these chords is looking at the sheet and making sure your brain knows what they are. Practicing those chords is your brain telling your fingers what to play. And the third section, which is applying these chords, we're going to look at in lesson 3, which is where I'll see you next. See you then.